The barrel staves scattered across the dusty workshop floor like broken bones, and Nora Vaughn stood among them with splinters embedded in her palms and tears. She refused to shed burning behind her eyes. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 3 months, taken by a rattlesnake bite that turned his leg black before the fever claimed him. And now the cooperage he had built with his own hands was failing, because she could not swing a hammer hard enough to drive the hoops tight around the barrels that kept this God-forsaken town's water from evaporating under the merciless Texas sun. Terlingua, in the summer of 1883, was a place where hope went to die slowly, baked into the rocky soil alongside the cinnabar ore that drew desperate men to tear open the earth in search of mercury. The town clung to existence in the Chihuahuan desert like a tick on a dying dog, surrounded by mountains that shimmered with heat mirages and ocotillo plants that looked like they were reaching toward heaven in supplication. Nora had come here 5 years ago as Thomas Vaughn's bride, barely 20 years old and foolish enough to believe that love could soften the sharp edges of this brutal landscape. Now, at 25, she knew better. The workshop door swung open, letting in a blast of afternoon heat that made the air shimmer. Nora looked up, squinting against the sudden brightness, and saw a man's silhouette filling the doorway. He was tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the frame, broad-shouldered in the way of men who spent their lives wrestling cattle and the land itself into submission. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of sun-bleached leather. "Name's Wade Callum. I heard you might be looking for help with the cooperage." Nora wiped her hands on her apron, feeling the splinters dig deeper. "I appreciate the concern, Mr. Callum, but I cannot afford to hire anyone right now. The business is barely bringing in enough to keep food on my table." Wade stepped into the workshop, his boots crunching on wood shavings. He had eyes the color of aged whiskey, and they took in the scattered barrel staves, the poorly fitted hoops, the evidence of her failure with a single sweeping glance. "I was not looking to be hired, exactly. I need barrels for a cattle operation I am starting up. Good water barrels that will not leak or fall apart on the trail. Figured maybe we could work out a trade arrangement." "A trade?" Nora's voice was flat with exhaustion. She had been up since before dawn, trying to salvage the mess she had made of yesterday's work, and her body ached in places she had not known could ache. "What kind of trade?" "I help you get this cooperage back on its feet, teach you what you need to know to keep it running, and in exchange, you make the barrels I need at cost, plus whatever other barrels you can sell to the miners and ranchers around here." He moved closer, picking up one of the broken staves and examining it with the careful attention of someone who understood craftsmanship. "This is good oak. Your husband knew what he was doing with materials. The technique just needs some refinement." Nora felt something dangerous stir in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like hope. "Why would you do that? You could just order barrels from El Paso or San Antonio." "Could," Wade agreed, setting down the stave. "But that would take months, and I would be at the mercy of their prices and their schedules. This way, I get what I need when I need it, and you get to keep your husband's business alive. Seems like a fair exchange to me." She wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to collapse into the relief of having someone else shoulder this impossible burden, but 3 months of grinding survival had taught her to be suspicious of easy answers. "What is the catch, Mr. Callum?" "No catch." He met her eyes directly, and she found herself believing him despite her better judgment. "I am new to this area, looking to build something lasting. A reliable cooper is worth its weight in gold out here, and I would rather invest in someone local than depend on supply lines that can be cut by weather, bandits, or simple incompetence." Nora looked around the workshop, at Thomas's tools hanging on the walls, at the half-finished barrels that represented orders she could not fill, at the dream that was slipping through her fingers like sand through an hourglass. She thought about the alternative, about selling everything and moving back east to live as a dependent in her sister's household, forever marked as the poor relation who had failed at frontier life. "All right," she said finally. "We can try your trade arrangement. But I pay my own way, Mr. Callum. I will not be beholden to anyone's charity." A smile flickered across his face, quick as summer lightning. "I would not expect anything less, Mrs. Vaughn. Shall we start tomorrow morning? Early, before the heat gets too bad." "Dawn," Nora agreed, and felt the world shift slightly beneath her feet, as if something had been set into motion that could not be stopped. Wade Callum arrived the next morning just as the sun was painting the Chisos Mountains pink and gold, carrying a leather satchel that clinked with the sound of tools. Nora had been awake for an hour already, unable to sleep for thinking about this stranger who had walked into her life with promises that seemed too good to be true. She had put coffee on to boil and swept the workshop floor, trying to impose some order on the chaos. "Morning," Wade said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered with a nod of thanks. "Sleep well." "Well enough," Nora lied. The truth was that she had lain awake in the bed she had shared with Thomas, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. Wondering if this cowboy, with his easy promises, would turn out to be like so many other men she had encountered since Thomas's death, men who saw a widow as prey, as something to be exploited or possessed. Wade seemed to sense her wariness. He kept a respectful distance as they worked, showing her how to soak the staves properly so the wood would bend without splitting, how to angle the draw knife to shave the wood to exactly the right thickness, how to heat the hoops so they would contract tight as they cooled. He was patient when she made mistakes, quick to praise when she got something right, and he never once made her feel incompetent or foolish for not knowing things that Thomas had made look effortless. "Your husband must have been a talented man," Wade said as they broke for lunch, sitting in the shade of the workshop's overhang with bread and cheese and cool water from the well. "These tools are quality and the workspace is laid out smart. Everything in reach, good light from those windows." "He was," Nora said, surprised by how much it hurt to talk about Thomas, even after 3 months. "He learned the trade from his father back in Missouri, came out here because he heard the mines needed barrels, thought he could build a good business." She paused, taking a sip of water. "He was right, too. We were doing well until the snake." Wade was quiet for a moment, watching the heat shimmer rise from the desert floor. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said finally. "Fever took her and our infant son both up in Wyoming. Thought I would die from it myself, truth be told. Felt like someone had carved out my insides and left nothing but a hollow shell." Nora looked at him with new eyes, seeing past the capable exterior to the grief that lurked beneath. "I am sorry for your loss, and I for yours." He met her gaze and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain. "It gets easier, they tell me. Not sure I believe that yet, but I keep waking up and putting one foot in front of the other. Figured moving south, starting fresh, might help." "Does it?" Nora asked. "Help, I mean." Wade considered the question seriously. "Some days. Other days I wake up and forget for a moment, and then remembering hits me all over again like a kick from a horse. But the work helps. Keeping busy, building something new, gives the grief somewhere to go besides just eating me alive." They sat in companionable silence after that. Two people who understood that some wounds never fully healed, they just learned to become part of you. When they went back to work, the atmosphere in the workshop had shifted slightly, become less formal. Wade told her about the ranch he was planning. a modest operation focused on breeding horses rather than cattle, taking advantage of the hardy Mustang bloodlines that thrived in the harsh desert climate. Nora found herself telling him about her life before Terlingua, about growing up in St. Louis in a merchant family, about how she had met Thomas at a church social and been charmed by his quiet competence and his dreams of Western prosperity. The days fell into a pattern. Wade would arrive at dawn, and they would work until the midday heat became unbearable, then rest in the shade before resuming in the late afternoon. Slowly, steadily, Nora's skills improved. Her hands learned the feel of properly shaped wood. Her arms grew stronger from swinging the hammer. Her eye developed the ability to spot flaws in the grain that would lead to leaks or splits. The pile of completed barrels in the corner grew, and with it, Nora's confidence. Wade was true to his word about the trade arrangement. He took 12 barrels for his operation at cost and helped her deliver the backlogged orders to the miners and ranchers who had been waiting impatiently. The money that started coming in was enough to buy food and supplies with some left over, enough that Nora could sleep without the constant gnawing anxiety about how she would survive. But something else was growing alongside her competence with the cooperage, something she tried hard not to acknowledge. She found herself looking forward to Wade's arrival each morning, to the sound of his voice explaining some fine point of woodworking, to the rare smile that transformed his weathered face. She noticed the way his hands moved with sure precision, the strength in his shoulders when he lifted heavy timbers, the patience in his manner when she struggled with a difficult task. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas, this awareness of another man. 6 weeks after Wade first walked into her workshop, Nora was working alone on a Saturday afternoon when the heat finally defeated her. She had been pushing too hard, trying to finish an order by Monday, and she had ignored the warning signs until the world started to spin and her vision narrowed to a tunnel. She made it to the door before her legs gave out, collapsing against the frame with her heart hammering and her breath coming in shallow gasps. Wade found her there an hour later. He had ridden into town for supplies and stopped by out of habit, and the sight of her slumped in the doorway sent him running. "Nora, Jesus, what happened?" She tried to answer, but her tongue felt thick and clumsy. Wade wasted no time on questions. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, carried her to the small house behind the workshop, and laid her on the bed. Then he was moving with swift efficiency, bringing water from the well, soaking cloths to lay across her forehead and wrists, opening windows to create a cross breeze. "Drink," he ordered, supporting her head while he held a cup to her lips. Slowly, not too much at once. Nora drank, feeling the cool water slide down her parched throat, feeling awareness slowly return to her limbs. Wade's face swam into focus above her, creased with worry, and she felt a rush of embarrassment at her weakness. "I am all right," she managed. "Just pushed too hard in the heat." "You are not all right," Wade said sharply. "You are half dead from exhaustion and sun exposure." "When did you last take a full day of rest?" Nora could not remember. Since Thomas died, every day had been a battle for survival, every moment devoted to keeping the business alive and food on the table. Rest was a luxury she could not afford. "That is what I thought," Wade said when she did not answer. He sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the water cup, and his expression was a mixture of frustration and concern. "Nora, you are going to kill yourself working like this. Your husband would not have wanted that." "My husband is dead," Nora said, and was horrified when her voice broke. "He is dead, and I am so tired, Wade. I am so goddamn tired of being strong and holding everything together and pretending I can do this alone." The tears came then, 3 months of grief and exhaustion and fear pouring out in great racking sobs. Wade set the cup aside and gathered her into his arms, holding her while she fell apart, murmuring words she could not make out but that sounded like comfort. She clung to him, to his solid warmth, to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, and let herself break in a way she had not allowed since the day they buried Thomas. When the storm finally passed, she found herself still in Wade's arms, her face pressed against his chest, his hand stroking her hair with gentle repetition. She knew she should pull away, should reassert the proper distance between a widow and a man who was not her husband, but she did not have the strength. She was so tired of being alone. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be." Wade's voice rumbled in his chest. "God knows you have earned the right to fall apart. You have been carrying a load that would break most men, and you have been doing it alone. But you do not have to anymore, Nora. I am here." She tilted her head back to look at him, and found his whiskey-colored eyes looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Wade, I know it is too soon," he said quietly. "I know you are still grieving, and I am not trying to take advantage. But I need you to know that I care about you, not just as a business partner or a friend. You have worked your way into my heart without even trying, and I cannot stand by and watch you destroy yourself." Nora's heart was pounding, but not from heat exhaustion this time. "I cared about Thomas. I know you did, and I loved my Margaret with everything I had. But they are gone, Nora, and we are still here. Still breathing, still feeling, still needing connection and comfort and someone to share the weight with." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear tracks. "I am not asking you to forget your husband or to stop grieving. I am just asking you to let me help. Let me take care of you the way you deserve to be cared for." "I do not know how," Nora admitted. "I have been so focused on surviving that I have forgotten how to do anything else." "Then let me remind you." Wade leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss that was more benediction than passion. "Starting with rest. You are going to stay in this bed for the rest of the day and all of tomorrow. I will handle the workshop. You have your own work to do. Nothing that cannot wait." He eased her back against the pillows, pulling the light sheet up over her. "Sleep, Nora. I will be here when you wake up." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Her eyes drifted closed, and the last thing she felt was Wade's hand holding hers, solid and real and reassuring. When she woke, the light had changed to the golden slant of late afternoon, and the house was filled with the smell of something cooking. Nora sat up slowly, testing her body, and found that the dizziness had passed. She felt wrung out but clear-headed, as if the breakdown had purged something toxic from her system. Wade was in her kitchen, stirring a pot over the stove with the concentration of a man not entirely comfortable with the task. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and relief flooded his face. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Nora moved into the room, aware that her hair was a tangled mess and her dress was wrinkled, but too drained to care about propriety. "What are you making?" "Attempting to make stew." "Fair warning, I am a better hand with barrels than cooking, so it might be questionable." He ladled some into a bowl and handed it to her. "But it is hot and it has vegetables and meat, so it should put some strength back into you." The stew was actually decent, hearty and filling, and Nora ate 2 bowls while Wade watched with satisfaction. Afterward, they sat at her small kitchen table as the desert cooled around them and the first stars began to appear in the enormous sky. "I meant what I said earlier," Wade said into the comfortable silence. "About caring for you." Nora traced the rim of her water glass with one finger, gathering her thoughts. "I know you did, and I would be lying if I said I did not feel something for you too. But Wade, I am terrified. Thomas has only been gone 3 months. What kind of woman does it make me if I have feelings for another man so soon? It makes you human, Wade said firmly. Grief does not follow a schedule, Nora. There is no proper timeline for when you are allowed to start living again. And from what you have told me about your husband, he sounds like the kind of man who would want you to be happy, not to spend the rest of your life locked in mourning. Maybe. Nora looked up at him, at this man who had walked into her life when she most needed help, who had been patient and kind, and who saw her as more than just a business transaction or a potential conquest. I just do not want to dishonor Thomas's memory. Wade reached across the table and took her hand. You could never do that. The love you had for him is part of who you are, and nothing that happens between us will change or diminish that. I am not asking you to replace him or forget him. I am just asking for a chance to build something new with you. Something that honors what we have both lost while giving us both a reason to keep going forward. Nora looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they both bore from hard work, at the strength and gentleness in his grip. She thought about the future she had imagined with Thomas, the one that had died with him in a welter of fever and delirium. She thought about the grinding exhaustion of the past 3 months, the loneliness that had become her constant companion, the fear that this was all her life would ever be from now on. And then she thought about the possibility of something different, of partnership and support and maybe, eventually, love again. All right, she said softly. A chance. That is all I can promise right now. Wade's smile was like sunrise over the mountains. That is all I am asking for. True to his word, Wade did not push for more than she was ready to give. He continued to come to the workshop each morning, continued to teach her and work alongside her. But now there was an acknowledged current running beneath their interactions, an awareness of potential that colored everything they did. He would brush past her in the close confines of the workshop, and she would feel the heat of his body. She would laugh at something he said and catch him watching her with an expression of quiet wonder. They would work in companionable silence, and she would realize that she was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since Thomas died. The town noticed, of course. Terlingua was too small for anything to go unnoticed, and the sight of Wade Callum spending every day at the Vaughn cooperage gave the gossips plenty to chew on. Nora endured the speculative looks and the barely veiled questions with as much grace as she could muster, but it wore on her. She had been respectable Mrs. Vaughn, the cooper's wife, and now she was Nora Vaughn the widow, potentially scandalous in her association with a man who was not her husband. It came to a head on a Sunday morning when Nora went to the general store for supplies. Martha Hendricks, the banker's wife and Terlingua's self-appointed moral guardian, cornered her by the flour barrels with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Nora, dear, how lovely to see you," Martha said in a voice that carried to every corner of the store. "You look well." That Mr. Callum must be a very attentive business partner. Nora felt her spine stiffen. Wade has been very helpful in getting the cooperage back to full operation, yes. Oh, I am sure he has been. Martha's tone dripped with false sympathy. But dear, people are starting to talk. A young widow spending so much time alone with an unmarried man, it does not look proper. I would hate for your reputation to be damaged. My reputation is my concern, Mrs. Hendricks, Nora said evenly, though anger was rising hot in her chest. And Mr. Callum has been nothing but respectful. I am sure he has, dear, but you know how people are. They see a pretty young woman and a handsome man and they assume the worst. Martha leaned in conspiratorially. If you need help with the business, perhaps a more appropriate arrangement could be made. My brother-in-law might be willing to purchase the cooperage from you, give you enough money to return east and live comfortably. The presumption took Nora's breath away. I have no intention of selling my husband's business or leaving Terlingua. But dear, surely you cannot mean to continue running a cooperage by yourself. It is not fitting work for a woman. Martha's expression had shifted from false concern to genuine disapproval. And carrying on with Mr. Callum will only make things worse. You are still in mourning. People expect a certain standard of behavior. Something inside Nora snapped. She had been tired when she woke up this morning, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with carrying the weight of other people's expectations. She was tired of being judged, tired of being told what she could and could not do, tired of living her life according to rules designed by people who had never had to fight for survival in the unforgiving desert. With respect, Mrs. Hendricks, I do not care what people expect, Nora said clearly, her voice carrying through the suddenly quiet store. I am running my business, I am surviving, and I am doing it with the help of a good man who has asked for nothing improper from me. If that offends your sensibilities, then I suggest you spend less time worrying about my life and more time tending to your own. She gathered her supplies, paid the wide-eyed clerk, and walked out of the store with her head high, aware that she had just made an enemy but too angry to care. Let them talk. Let them judge. She was done living her life for their approval. Wade was at the cooperage when she returned, working on a special order for one of the mining companies. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What happened? Nora told him about the encounter with Martha Hendricks, about the not-so-subtle pressure to sell the business and leave town, about the judgment being passed on their association. Wade listened in silence, a muscle ticking in his jaw, and when she finished, he pulled her into his arms. I am sorry, he said into her hair. I have made things harder for you. No, Nora pulled back to look at him. You have made things possible for me. Without your help, I would have lost the business already. Without your friendship, I would have drowned in loneliness and grief. I do not care what Martha Hendricks or anyone else thinks. You should not have to defend yourself for accepting help or for moving forward with your life, Wade said fiercely. Your husband has been dead 3 months. You are allowed to survive. You are allowed to be happy. Am I? Nora asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. Because sometimes I feel guilty for being happy, for looking forward to seeing you, for thinking about a future that does not include Thomas. Wade cupped her face in his hands, his gaze intense. Thomas is gone, Nora. He will always be part of your past, part of who you are, but he cannot be part of your future. That future belongs to you, and you get to decide what it looks like. If you want me in it, I will be there. If you do not, I will accept that and step back. But either way, you deserve to live, not just exist. Nora felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had been holding onto her grief like a shield, using it to keep the world at bay, but Wade was right. Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling things other than pain. I want you in it, she whispered. I want you in my future. Wade's kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. But when Nora responded, leaning into him and opening her mouth under his, it deepened into something hungry and desperate. 3 months of grief and loneliness poured into that kiss, along with the tentative hope of something new being born. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it is fast, I know it is complicated, but I love you, Nora Vaughn. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but this time they were not tears of grief. I love you too. God help me, I love you too. They stood there in the workshop, holding each other while the desert wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility and promise. Nora knew that loving Wade did not erase her love for Thomas. did not dishonor his memory. It was simply proof that her heart was still capable of feeling, still capable of hope. The next few months brought change to Terlingua and to Nora's life in ways she could not have imagined. Wade's horse operation began to take shape on land he had purchased 5 miles outside of town, a sprawling property with good water and grass that could support a decent-sized herd. He split his time between building his ranch and helping Nora at the cooperage, and slowly the two operations became intertwined. Nora made barrels and water troughs for Wade's ranch. Wade supplied horses to pull the wagon that delivered Nora's barrels to customers throughout the region. More importantly, they became partners in every sense of the word. Wade moved into the house behind the cooperage 6 months after they first kissed, and though it scandalized Martha Hendricks and her ilk, Nora found she genuinely did not care. They were not hiding what they had, but neither were they flaunting it. They were simply two people building a life together, supporting each other through the hard work and harder conditions of frontier life. Wade proposed on a cool November evening, 1 year after he had first walked into her workshop. They were sitting on the porch of the house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, turning the ring over in his fingers. "And I know that some people will say it is too soon after Thomas. But Nora, I want to build a life with you, not someday but now. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to face whatever comes next knowing you are by my side. Will you marry me?" Nora looked at the ring, at Wade's weathered face, at the home they had built together through patience and hard work and love that had grown from grief into something strong and true. She thought about Thomas and the life they had planned, about the dreams that had died with him. And then she thought about the new dreams taking shape, dreams that honored what she had lost while embracing what she had found. "Yes," she said, and slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in January of 1885 by the circuit preacher who passed through Terlingua every few months, in a simple ceremony attended by the handful of people in town who approved and the larger number who came out of curiosity. Nora wore a blue dress she had made herself, and Wade wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was full of promise and joy. The cooperage continued to thrive under their combined management, and Wade's horse ranch grew into a respectable operation that supplied mounts to ranchers and the military throughout West Texas. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, able to set aside money for the future and help their neighbors when times were hard. 2 years after their wedding, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a complicated mix of emotions. She had wanted children with Thomas, had mourned the family they would never have when he died. Now she was carrying Wade's child, and while she was happy, there was also a bittersweet edge to that happiness. Wade sensed her complicated feelings immediately. He found her sitting in the workshop one evening, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, tears running silently down her face. "Talk to me," he said, kneeling beside her chair. "I am happy," Nora said, her voice thick with tears. "I truly am, but I feel like I am betraying Thomas somehow. Like by having your baby, I am erasing the future I was supposed to have with him." Wade took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You are not erasing anything, Nora. What you had with Thomas was real and it mattered. This baby does not change that. All it means is that your life is moving forward, that you are living instead of just existing in the shadow of what you lost." "I wish he could have met you," Nora whispered. "I think he would have liked you. I think he would have been glad that you found me when I needed help." "I like to think he would have," Wade agreed. "And I like to think he would be happy knowing that you are loved and cared for, that you have a good life. That is what people who love us want, Nora. They want us to be happy, even after they are gone." Nora leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "I am scared." "I know, so am I." Wade's arms tightened around her. "But we will face it together, just like we have faced everything else. And when this baby comes, we will love them with everything we have and teach them to be strong and kind and brave." Their son was born in September of 1887, during a brief cool spell that brought blessed relief from the summer heat. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the town's midwife and marked by hours of pain that left Nora exhausted and wrung out. But when they placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, all the pain evaporated in a rush of overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Wade said, his voice choked with emotion as he looked at his son. "Nora, he is perfect." They named him Thomas Wade, honoring both the past and the present, acknowledging that the love Nora had for her first husband was part of the foundation on which her new family was built. When the baby was christened, Nora felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if some long-held tension had finally released. Life with an infant was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Thomas Wade was a healthy, hungry baby who seemed determined to make his presence known to everyone within earshot. Nora learned to work in the cooperage with the baby strapped to her back, and Wade became adept at soothing his son while managing the horses. They traded off sleepless nights and dirty diapers with the ease of partners who knew how to support each other without needing to be asked. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of work and family and the slow, steady accumulation of a good life. Young Thomas learned to walk in the cooperage, taking his first wobbly steps between barrel hoops while Nora and Wade watched with pride. He grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's whiskey-colored eyes, and he was the delight of both his parents' lives. When Thomas was 3, Nora became pregnant again, and this time the news brought only joy. Their daughter, Margaret Rose, was born in the spring of 1891, named for Wade's first wife in a gesture that meant more to him than he could put into words. She was a calm, watchful baby, content to observe the world around her with solemn gray eyes that seemed far too wise for an infant. "I think she has her namesake's spirit," Wade said one evening, holding his daughter while she studied his face with grave concentration. "Margaret was always the calm one, the steady presence that kept me grounded." Nora reached over to stroke her daughter's soft cheek. "Then she has a good spirit to carry. Your Margaret sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Wade agreed, "just like Thomas was a good man." "We have been lucky, Nora, to love and be loved by such good people. And we are lucky to have found each other when we needed it most." Nora thought about that first day when Wade had walked into her failing cooperage, when she had been drowning in grief and exhaustion, and had seen his offer of help as either charity or a trap. She thought about how wrong she had been, how his presence in her life had been the lifeline she needed to pull herself back from the edge of despair. "I was so tired that day," she said softly, "when you first came to the workshop. I was tired of fighting, tired of pretending I could handle everything alone, just tired of existing. I did not know how I was going to survive." Wade shifted the baby to one arm so he could reach over and take Nora's hand. "I know. I could see it in your eyes, the exhaustion and the grief. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing my own pain reflected back at me. And then you said I could rest." Nora remembered the moment clearly, remembered the overwhelming relief of having someone else shoulder the burden, even temporarily. "You said I could rest in your arms, that you would take care of things." "And you can," Wade said firmly. Any time you need to, Nora, you can rest in my arms. That is what marriage means, what partnership means. We take turns being strong for each other. We share the load. And when one of us is tired, the other one steps up. Rest in your arms forever, Nora murmured, testing the words. I like the sound of that. Wade smiled, the expression lighting up his weathered face. Forever sounds about right to me. They sat together in the gathering dusk, their children sleeping peacefully, the cooperage and the ranch both thriving, the future stretching out before them full of promise. Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the loss and grief that had nearly destroyed her, about the unexpected love that had saved her. She had been Thomas Vaughn's wife, and she had loved him deeply. She would always carry that love, always honor his memory. But she was also Wade Callum's wife now, the mother of his children, his partner in building a life that was rich with meaning and purpose. The two loves did not cancel each other out. They existed side by side, proof that the human heart was capable of holding more than one truth at a time. As the years continued to unfold, the Callum family became a fixture of Terlingua's community. Young Thomas grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved helping his father with the horses and had inherited his mother's head for business. Margaret Rose developed a stubborn streak and a love of wide, open spaces, and could often be found attempting to follow her older brother on adventures that usually ended with scraped knees and dirty dresses. The cooperage expanded as the mining operations in the area grew, and eventually Wade and Nora took on an apprentice, a young man from El Paso who wanted to learn the trade. It felt right to pass on the knowledge that Thomas Vaughn had brought to Terlingua, to ensure that the craft would continue even after Nora and Wade were gone. In 1895, when Thomas Wade was 8 and Margaret Rose was 4, Nora found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, marked by illness and fatigue that reminded her uncomfortably of those first exhausted months after Thomas Vaughn's death. But Wade was there, taking over more of the physical labor, ensuring she rested, bringing her ginger tea when the nausea was bad. You told me once I could rest in your arms, Nora said one difficult morning, curled up in bed while Wade sat beside her stroking her hair. I am taking you up on that promise. Rest as long as you need, Wade replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I've got everything handled. Their third child, a boy they named Daniel, arrived in January of 1896 after a mercifully quick labor. He was smaller than his siblings had been, with a shock of red-gold hair that came from some distant branch of Wade's family tree and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. But he was healthy and strong, and he completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. The turn of the century found the Callums prosperous and happy. The cooperage was now being run primarily by Nora with help from their apprentice, while Wade focused on the horse ranch, which had grown to include a breeding program that was gaining recognition throughout Texas. Young Thomas, now 13, was already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and capable and utterly devoted to his family. Margaret Rose, at 9, was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, keeping everyone on their toes. And 5-year-old Daniel was the baby of the family, spoiled by his older siblings and his parents alike. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Wade took Nora up to a high point on the ranch land, where they could see the cooperage in one direction and the ranch buildings in the other, with the town of Terlingua nestled in the valley and the mountains rising in the distance. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Wade asked, his arm around Nora's waist as they surveyed their kingdom. You said you could not afford to hire anyone, that you were barely surviving. I remember, Nora said. I was so desperate and so scared. I thought I was going to lose everything. And instead, you gained everything." Wade turned her to face him, his hands resting on her shoulders. "A thriving business, a family, a life full of love and purpose. You did that, Nora. You survived the worst thing that could happen and came out the other side stronger." "We did that," Nora corrected gently. "I could not have done it without you, Wade. You came into my life when I was at my lowest point, and you did not try to rescue me or take over. You just offered to help, to teach me, to stand beside me while I figured out how to survive. That is what saved me. Not you doing it for me, but you doing it with me." Wade's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I am the lucky one, Nora. I was broken when I came here, hollowed out by loss and just going through the motions. And then I met you, and you reminded me what it felt like to care about someone, to have a reason to keep building and dreaming and planning for the future." They stood there on the hilltop as the sun sank toward the mountains. Two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their former lives. The wind carried the sounds of their children playing near the ranch house, and somewhere in the distance, one of Wade's horses whinnied. "I still miss him sometimes," Nora admitted quietly. "Thomas. I will see something or hear something, and for a moment I will think about telling him, and then I remember he is gone." "I know," Wade said. "I feel the same way about Margaret, but missing them does not mean we have not moved on or that what we have now is somehow less real or important. It just means we loved them, and that love does not disappear just because they are gone." Nora leaned into her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor through so many storms. "I love you, Wade Callum. Thank you for teaching me that it was okay to be tired, that it was okay to need help, that it was okay to let someone else carry the weight sometimes." "I love you too," Wade replied. "Thank you for letting me in, for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy with a crazy scheme about trading labor for barrels. Thank you for building this life with me." As they walked back down the hill toward home, toward the noise and chaos and love of their family, Nora reflected on the strange paths that life could take. She had come to Terlingua as Thomas Vaughn's young bride, full of dreams about the future. She had lost him to the harsh realities of frontier life and had nearly lost herself in the grief that followed. But then Wade had appeared, offering not salvation but partnership, not rescue but collaboration. She had been tired, so tired that she had not thought she could take another step. And Wade had said, essentially, "Rest in my arms. Let me help carry this. You do not have to do it alone." That simple offer had changed everything. The years continued their steady march forward. Young Thomas Wade went off to college in San Antonio, studying business with the intent of eventually taking over the combined operations of the cooperage and the ranch. Margaret Rose showed an unexpected talent for training horses and became Wade's right hand in that part of the business. Daniel, the surprise baby, grew into a thoughtful, artistic child who filled sketchbooks with drawings of the desert landscape and the people who inhabited it. Wade and Nora grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces marked by sun and wind and the passage of time. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, enriched by the years of partnership and the knowledge that they had chosen each other, had built something lasting from the ashes of their former lives. In 1908, when Nora was 50 years old and Wade was 52, they celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Thomas Wade had married a schoolteacher from Fort Davis and had 2 children of his own. Margaret Rose was engaged to the son of a neighboring rancher. Even young Daniel, at 12, was already showing interest in a girl from town. As Nora looked around the table at her family, at the life that had blossomed from that desperate day when Wade first walked into her workshop, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived the death of her first husband. She had survived the grinding poverty and exhaustion that followed. She had survived because Wade had offered help without judgment, had offered love without demanding she stop grieving, had offered partnership instead of dominance. That night, lying in bed beside the man who had been her partner for more than 2 decades, Nora whispered the words that had become their private mantra. "I am tired tonight." Wade immediately pulled her close, arranging her head on his shoulder, his arm secure around her. "Then rest in my arms," he replied, just as he had replied hundreds of times over the years. "Rest in my arms forever." And Nora did, drifting off to sleep with the sound of Wade's heartbeat in her ear and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. She had been the cooper's widow, broken and exhausted and ready to give up. But Wade had seen past the grief to the strong woman underneath, and he had offered her not charity but choice. The choice to keep fighting, the choice to build something new, the choice to love again. She had chosen to rest in his arms, and in doing so, she had found not just survival but life in its fullest, richest sense. She had found partnership and passion and purpose. She had found a family and a future and a love that honored her past while embracing her present. The desert wind whispered through the night, carrying the scent of sage and creosote, and Nora Callum slept peacefully in her husband's arms, content in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished and home. The years between 1908 and 1920 brought both joy and sorrow to the Callum family, as is the nature of life in all times and places. Thomas Wade took over management of the cooperage and expanded it to include furniture making, capitalizing on the skills he had learned from both his parents. Margaret Rose married her rancher and merged her horse training operation with his cattle ranch, creating one of the most successful operations in West Texas. Daniel, true to his artistic nature, went east to study art and returned with a wife from Boston who was charmed by the wild beauty of the desert. Wade's health began to decline in 1918, his heart growing weak after decades of hard physical labor in harsh conditions. He bore it with the same quiet strength he had brought to everything else, never complaining, simply adjusting his activities to match his capabilities. Nora found herself in the reverse of their original roles, now the one providing support and care, ensuring Wade did not push himself too hard. "I am supposed to be the one taking care of you," Wade grumbled one afternoon when Nora insisted he rest instead of helping with the horses. "We take turns, remember," Nora said, settling beside him on the porch. "You have carried me through plenty of hard times. Now it is my turn to carry you." Wade reached for her hand, his grip not as strong as it once was but still steady. "I do not regret a single day, Nora, not one moment of the life we have built together." "Neither do I," Nora said truthfully. "Even the hard parts, even the grief and the struggle. It all led us here, to this life, to our family. I would not change a thing." They sat together in the afternoon sun, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss and had created something beautiful and lasting. Around them, the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted on the breeze, and the mountains stood eternal watch over the desert they had both learned to call home. Wade passed quietly in his sleep in March of 1920, his heart simply giving out one night while he slept beside Nora. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was profound, a deep ache that reminded her of losing Thomas all those years ago, but it was different this time. She had loved Thomas with the bright, untested passion of youth. She had loved Wade with the deep, abiding devotion of a partner who had shared decades of life, who had built something lasting together. At Wade's funeral, attended by what seemed like half of West Texas, Nora stood dry-eyed and strong, supported by her children and grandchildren. She spoke briefly, her voice steady as she told the assembled mourners about the day Wade had walked into her cooperage and offered to help a desperate widow who was drowning in grief and responsibility. "He taught me that it was okay to be tired," she said, looking out at the sea of faces. "That needing help did not make me weak, that accepting support did not make me less capable. He taught me that love could bloom even in the aftermath of terrible loss, that the heart was capable of holding more than one great love in a lifetime. He taught me that building a life together meant taking turns being strong, meant carrying each other through the hard times." She paused, feeling the weight of Wade's absence like a physical thing, but also feeling the strength of the family they had built together. "He told me I could rest in his arms forever, and he kept that promise. Every single day of our marriage, he kept that promise. And now, even though he is gone, I still feel the comfort of those arms, the strength of that love. It does not disappear just because he has left this world. It remains, part of the foundation of everything we built together." After the funeral, after the crowds dispersed, and the casseroles had been delivered and eaten, and the condolence cards had been read, Nora found herself alone in the house she had shared with Wade for 35 years. She walked through the rooms, touching the furniture they had chosen together, looking at the photographs of their family, remembering the 1,000 small moments that made up a life shared. She thought about being young Nora Vaughn, 20 years old and newly married to Thomas, full of dreams about the future. She thought about being Nora Vaughn, the widow, 25 and drowning in grief and responsibility, convinced she would never be happy again. She thought about becoming Nora Callum, learning to love again, learning to build a new life from the wreckage of the old one. Now, at 62, she was a widow for the second time. But this time, she was not drowning. This time, she had the strength and skills and support network that Wade had helped her build. She had a thriving business that her son was managing beautifully. She had children and grandchildren who loved her. She had a life that was full and rich and meaningful, even in the absence of the man who had helped her create it. The grief was real and deep, but so was the gratitude. Wade had given her 35 years of partnership and love. He had given her 3 children and had helped raise them into remarkable adults. He had given her a life that honored both her past and her present, that allowed her to love Thomas's memory while also fully embracing the new family she was building. Most importantly, he had taught her that she was stronger than she knew, more capable than she believed, more resilient than she had ever imagined. He had taught her that asking for help was not weakness, that vulnerability was not failure, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you were tired and let someone else carry the load for a while. Nora lived for another 15 years after Wade's death, dying peacefully at 77, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. In those final years, she was known throughout the region as the matriarch of the Callum family, a woman who had survived 2 husbands and built a business empire in the process. But those who knew her best understood that her true legacy was not the cooperage or the ranch or the financial success. Her true legacy was in teaching her family the lessons Wade had taught her, that love could bloom more than once in a lifetime, that asking for help was a sign of wisdom, not weakness, that building something lasting required partnership and patience and the willingness to take turns being strong for each other, that grief and joy could coexist, that honoring the past did not mean being trapped by it. On the day Nora died, her daughter Margaret Rose was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. Nora's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but she smiled slightly and whispered words that Margaret Rose would remember for the rest of her own life. "I am so tired now, but it is all right. I can rest in his arms forever now. Both of them. Thomas and Wade waiting for me. What a lucky woman I have been, to have been loved by such good men, to have built such a beautiful life from such terrible loss." And then she was gone, slipping away peacefully, and Margaret Rose liked to think that somewhere, in whatever came after, Nora Vaughn Callum was reunited with the two great loves of her life, resting at last in arms that would hold her forever. The cooperage continued to operate for 3 more generations, before being converted into a museum in 1985, preserving the legacy of Thomas Vaughn, who had founded it, and Nora, who had saved it, and the Callum family, who had built it into an institution. The ranch still operated under Callum family ownership, now focused on training cutting horses for rodeo competitions. But the real legacy, the one that mattered most, lived on in the stories passed down through the generations. The story of a widow who had been drowning in grief and exhaustion, until a cowboy walked into her life and offered not rescue but partnership. The story of 2 broken people who had found each other and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their former lives. The story of love that bloomed in the harsh desert landscape, proving that hope could survive even in the most unforgiving conditions. The story of a woman who had been too tired to go on, and a man who had said, "Rest in my arms forever," and meant it with every fiber of his being. It was a story about survival and resilience and the power of human connection. It was a story about honoring the past while embracing the future. It was a story about the many forms love could take and how the heart was capable of holding more than one truth at a time. Most of all, it was a story about 2 people who had found each other exactly when they needed to, who had built a life together through hard work and patience and unwavering devotion, and who had proved that sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that burn bright and fast, but the ones that grow slowly and steadily, deepening with every passing year until they become as essential and enduring as the desert landscape itself. In Terlingua, Texas, where the mountains meet the desert and the mercury mines long ago played out, the Callum family story became legend, passed down from parents to children, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the face of terrible loss, it is possible to find love again, to build something lasting, to survive and eventually thrive. All it takes is the willingness to accept help when you are tired, to take a chance on partnership instead of isolation, and to believe that rest in someone's arms does not mean giving up, but rather finding the strength to keep going together forever.